Yeah, there you go.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlene Hoffbauer. I'm the Executive Director of the Workforce Planning Board of Waterloo Wellington Dufferin. I'd like to welcome you here today on our session, Coping with Stress in the Workplace, How Managers Can Deal with Conflict. As I said, if you have any questions, do put them in the chat. I will pull them off once we get to the Q&A portion of our event. If you have any, as I said, if you have any questions, I kind of want to explain why we decided to do this session and how we came to our speaker today. In May of 2019, we did a worker survey. And we studied why people stayed in jobs and why they left for other positions. And it was a response to our annual Employer One survey. We wanted to get to a point where we could figure out why people were staying, why they were leaving, because 60% of employers were talking about separations. And when we looked at those separations, we saw that so many of them were driven by the employee leaving the organization. So the question remains, why? We found that 8% of the respondents to the worker survey who had left a job had faced some form of harassment while on the job or bullying, which is an extreme form of conflict. That's conflict gone very wrong. And another 2% were not liking the company's culture or their environment. When we looked at what brought people satisfaction in their jobs, we saw that 43% of respondents listed positive relationships with their coworkers and their supervisors as how they got satisfaction in their roles. It was the second most common reason after personal satisfaction. Another 31% also mentioned being treated with dignity and respect. That personal drive, we feel, touches so much of what makes people satisfied with their work. Like, we talk about our coworkers, we talk about our supervisors. And so this whole issue of conflict really did rise to the top. Managers and supervisors, we know, can drive a lot of that appreciation and are a big factor when it comes to creating company culture, a supportive environment, and stopping harassment. So, and especially as we move into new working arrangements that COVID has presented to us, and that look like they're going to be with us for a while, that ability to deal with conflict, to support people having positive relationships, is a really valuable skill for managers and supervisors to have. So we started looking for someone who maybe could talk to this point, who could encourage this point, and I met Ricardo. He reached out to me over LinkedIn, and I'm so glad he did, because we had a conversation, and he was telling me what he does, and I was explaining what I was looking for, and it just seemed like the right match. So I want to introduce you to Ricardo Camara. Ricardo has held several senior leadership roles in multiple industries. As a result, he fully understands how unconscious bias, workplace conflict, and employee disengagement are primarily symptoms of ineffective communication in organizations. So it's kind of going back to what we were hearing in that worker survey. These result in toxic working environments, which came out in our survey. Ricardo established On This Rock Business Consulting to work one-on-one with business leaders to restore and strengthen working relationships and improve leadership effectiveness. He also delivers virtual corporate team development training that improves team collaboration, trust, and productivity through teaching principles of relationship awareness theory. His passion for and expertise in leadership transformation flows from his life experience, EQ certified training, and faith journey, which guides him to be authentic, transparent, and hopefully inspirational in working with his clients. Ricardo and his wife Betty just celebrated their 25th anniversary this year, and they're proud parents of 2 young adults, Kyle, who's 23, and Krista, who's 22. Ricardo hopes that you'll find the key insights he provides today valuable to you and your organization as you seek to overcome communication barriers and team performance challenges. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Ricardo.
Thank you very much, Charlene. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend this time this morning with you guys and to deal with this very important topic of stress, how to cope with stress in the workplace and how to manage conflict more effectively. And here we go. So why is this important? Well, it's important because stress is causing business leaders to experience high levels of anxiety and frustration and burnout, right? And Charlene provided us with some stats, not only for leaders, but also for employees. And the reality is that leaders and businesses are actually spending thousands and thousands of dollars trying to manage unproductive behaviors and conflict. There's a cost of conflict to organizations that it's a reality, and people need to spend a little bit of time and actually analyze the impact, financial impact it's having in the organization, aside from the impact on personal and health of the individuals. The average employee spends about 2.8 hours per week experiencing some sort of conflict in a workplace. So depending on the size of your organization, you can do the math right there, right? There's certainly an impact on the business financially. And conflict not only also impacts productivity, team performance, collaboration, trust, working relationships, and company culture, right? And there's a high financial cost for employee turnover, whether it's the toxic work environment that they're working in, or if it's the stress that they're working in. You know, a lot of organizations are losing key employees due to unresolved conflict, ongoing stresses that, and so in other instances, organizations are letting go employees because of perceived negative behavior and poor behavior. So there's certainly a cost there. So the typical outcomes that exists when conflict, that organizations experience when conflict exists, and I have a list here, and that's not limited to that, but it's most common ones that we experience, and that is loss in productivity and time, strained relationships, working relationships, a loss of business and reputation, impact on reputation of the business as well. Lack of collaboration. You know, you see that when there is tensions between not only employees within teams, but also within departments, internal departments in the organization. Lack of employee engagement and damaged morale, increased absenteeism. Once you start seeing increase in absenteeism, you can certainly guarantee that there's something going on within the organization that is related to stress and conflict. Poor decisions, missed opportunities, because we're so, when we get into situations where we're working in a very toxic work environment, you know, we lose focus, right? And so employees miss out on opportunities, and organizations miss out on opportunities to increase sales because they're so, and there was a level of sabotage at times, employee sabotage, we hear that as well. Turnover and recruitment issues, stress, health issues, mental health is going up, especially with COVID environment right now. Everybody's the fear and anxiety of everything that's going on, and added on to the conflict that may already be existing pre-COVID is adding to all that. So toxic work environment, legal and administrative costs, and also safety issues. And the reason I put that there is because in certain organizations, like manufacturing, construction, their safety is very important. It's part of the day-to-day operations. And when employees experience conflict and are working in a very stressful work environment, they start disengaging from their work. And as they do that, they also start disengaging from following the procedures that are meant to keep them safe. Unfortunately, it's actually added increase in injuries, not only to themselves, but also to the coworkers, because people are not paying attention to the things that are that need to. So it does definitely have a huge impact. But the question is, you know, which of these resonate with you the most, right? And I'm sure some of you in the call, you have identified a few key areas that you might actually be experiencing that. But all of these are symptoms. They're not the cause. And so we need to really get to the root cause. So what is the cause then? And the cause is communication effectiveness issue. And as I work with business leaders and as I work with organizations, at the core of their issues, and it doesn't matter whether it's performance issues, whether it's a conflict issue, whether it's procedural and relational issue, or leadership issue, at the core is communication effectiveness. And so today we're going to spend a little bit of time of really getting to the core of that, and hopefully you'll find some value information that may actually be able to help you start transforming the environment in which your company is working in right now. So how do you improve leadership and communication effectiveness that results in strengthening professional and personal relationships? And the reason I say professional and personal is because reality is our personal life and our professional life is interlinked. And how we can strengthen relationships, both personal and professional, has an impact in the success of our business as well, and all the other external relationships. Interesting fact is early this year, I came across this article in LinkedIn, and it focused on the top 5 soft skills that organizations are looking for in employees. And creativity, persuasion, ability to collaborate, ability to adapt to change, a higher level of emotional intelligence. These are all important for businesses because the emotional intelligence and these skills have a huge impact on how we interact with people in relationships. And so they also provided 10 hard skills, but I focus on the soft skills because that's where my expertise is in. And the development of soft skills is important at all levels in an organization. It's just not the frontline workers. It starts at the top and works its way down. So understanding that is also very important to know. Relationship awareness is the key to effectiveness communication. I truly believe that. I came across the relationship awareness theory, and it really focuses on the following. In order to achieve meaningful dialogue, we need to develop a simple and common language for people to understand the true motives behind behaviors. When we're talking about true motives is the why, the reasons why you or others may be behaving or acting in a certain way, what's driving you and others to behave in that way, and then knowing how to respond and act and put things in place that actually achieve the better results. So this results in leaders gaining an ability to manage and prevent conflict more effectively. And there's 4 key concepts that we're going to look at. The first concept is personal filters. So our unconscious bias influence perceptions of ourselves and of others. The second concept is that behavior is driven by the motivation to achieve self-worth. We do things because we want to bring value. We go to work because we want to bring value to the work that we do. Strengths, when overdone and misapplied, can actually be perceived as weaknesses or poor behaviors or negative behaviors. And finally, our motivation changes in conflict. So we look at 2 different conditions when we look at this, and we look at when things are going well, right? How we behave and how we're driven to act in a certain way. And then we'll also look at when we're in conflict, why we act and behave and respond in the way we do, right? And so understanding that is key here. So how to achieve communication effectiveness is, first of all, starts with awareness. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to raise a level of awareness today that hopefully will kind of start working towards developing the understanding, right? And then there is a level of acceptance and appreciation once we understand exactly why things are happening, why people behave a certain way, why we're driven to respond in a certain way, why we are triggered into conflict, into experience that conflict. And once we have that level of understanding, then we have acceptance and appreciation for ourselves, for our differences, but also towards others. And then we achieve the effectiveness that we're looking for. So we're going to deep dive into these key concepts a little bit more, so we can gain a little bit better understanding to that. And so the first concept was, again, personal filters. How our unconscious and conscious bias impacts how we see others and how they see us. This is where our perception, right? We perceive things to be a certain way because our unconscious bias. Our unconscious bias is basically what we filter things through based on our past experiences, right? And whether it's cultural experiences, whether it's work experiences or situation experiences that we've had, we certainly fill in these situations based on our unconscious biases. And we're going to look at how unconscious bias actually may be influencing you today and how you see things. So I'm going to do a quick exercise with you, and I'm going to ask you to participate, if you would. And so we're looking at this picture here, and I think we would agree that we see a man sitting on a lawn chair. It looks like he's sleeping, right? And someone is throwing a bucket of water on him, right? So I think that we would come to the conclusion that we're all seeing the same thing. But there's a couple questions that we do not know. And the first question that we have is, who is it throwing the water, right? And the second question is, why? Why is this person throwing the water? So if you would, on the chat, type in who you think is throwing the water and why you think that person is throwing the water. And Charlene, I won't have access to the chat, so if you could read that for me. And we're just going to take a couple suggestions here. What do you see and why you think that a bucket of water is being thrown on this individual?
So we're seeing that his child or daughter is doing it, joking around.
Right.
We're seeing the wife is throwing water to scare him.
Yeah.
Partner in fun, wife in frustration, spouse to wake him up, someone significant other having fun. We have someone who said fire, spouse looking to have fun, friend is a joke. So a lot of having some fun. Oh, he's supposed to be mowing the lawn.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. We can look at, look at the grass, here he is, supposed to be cutting the grass and fell asleep, and the wife is very upset and throw the water in there, right? But our unconscious, the point I'm trying to make here is how you could see how multiple people came up with different conclusions, right? And we're looking at the same situation, but our unconscious bias is filling those gaps where we have missing information, right? But there was one person that actually said it, and he said it right. The reality is that the hat was on fire, right? So the reason why the bucket was being thrown on this individual is because the hat was on fire. That's the reality of it. But our unconscious bias filled in a whole different story that was totally off. And when our unconscious bias kicks in, it leads us to take assumptions, right? And those assumptions leads us to make poor decisions. And then it leads us to experience conflict. And when there's that level of conflict, because our unconscious bias, and we're not aware how our unconscious bias is filling into what we perceive to be the reality, it leads to all of us to experience stress and toxic work environment. So it's very important for us to remember that it's difficult to fix a problem if you're not aware why it exists in the first place. Conventional training teaches us on what to say and what to do typically. And it teaches us how to say it and how to do it, right? I know I've been involved in a lot of leadership training programs in the past, and I worked for great organizations that had amazing leadership training, but are typically just focused on those areas and seldom to almost never focused on the why. The motivation or the motives, the reasons driving you and others to behave in a certain way, right? And understanding the why is key, because then allows us to actually understand what's really going on. So why are you and others perceive things differently? We need to understand that. So how you see yourself is based on our motives. And our motives is our core values, who we are at the core, right? And we're very unique. There's, it's also known as motivational value system. We have a motivational value system that drives the way we act and behave. And it's very unique to you. It's very unique to me. We all have a different motivational value system. And essentially, you know, how God made us, right? So, you know, we are the way we are. We act the way we are. We respond to things the way we respond because we are made in a certain way. Our motives, because we understand our motives, then we also understand what our true intentions are that leads to us behaving in a certain way. The why we are trying to do things the way we are doing. Unfortunately, what happens is that others see you based on your behaviors. They don't see you based on the why you're doing it, but what you're doing. And so as a result, that unconscious bias, because they don't really understand your intentions, that leads us to conflict because they don't see the intentions or the true motives. They assume that your behaviors must be because, and your behaviors may remind you of someone else they've dealt with in the past, or a situation that you've experienced in the past. And all these things create this other story, and that obviously leads us to experience some sort of conflict. So let's dive deeper into this. Let's use the analogy of a buoy. Excuse me. And the buoy here represents our strengths, right? And there's 28 different strengths that we look at. We typically, in relationships and communication, we typically use top 3, top 6 strengths the most. Those are our go-to. This is our comfortable zone. This is our home where we use most of those strengths. And like so the buoy represents what we see, what people see in us. And so the buoy being in the middle of the ocean, depending on the environment, depending on the waves and the current, that buoy may shift locations based on the situation that you're in, the environment that you're in, right? And so is our use of strengths. But how and why we're using those strengths never changes, because our motives, much like that buoy, is anchored at the bottom of the ocean. And our motives is who we are at the core. So that's what drives us to act in a certain way. That's what drives us to respond in a certain way. But how we choose our strengths could change, right? Core motives is the same. You can't really change who you are at your core, but you can change how you respond and what you do with those strengths. Just to kind of give you a very highlight this, and I don't want to get too in depth with this, but I think it's important for us to understand that there is 3 primary motives that we look at. There's 7 in total, but 3 main motives that kind of may help you understand why certain people respond to situations differently. Some people are motivated by people, the wanting to help others. So we call them motivational value system, blue motivational value system. Other people are driven by performance. These are the individuals that are result driven. They're driving to achieve those results, and how they respond is in a manner that they're looking always to achieve results, capitalize on opportunity, maximize potential, all these things. And others are more motivated by process, and that is to establish an order, to make sure that we dot the I's, we cross the T's, We analyze things before we move too quick, right? So we all have a level of concern for all three, but we are uniquely made in a way that we have a higher level of concern for one or a blend of two. And that's how we get to the 7 motivation value systems. But in this case, let's talk about just one, right? So we may be more motivated towards the welfare of others, concern for others. Other people might be motivated to welfare for achieving results, and it's the other ones for process. So remember that in relationships, we cannot control how we behave, how others behave, but we can control how we respond. And that's what we're talking about here, is to recognize that people respond differently to the same issue. You could be looking at the same issue, but we have different perspectives because we're motivated by different things. We're higher level of motivation by other things than you may have. And so how you react and respond really matters, right? We can either be abrupt, dismissive, and then productive, right? So if someone is in a meeting and they pipe up and they offer a suggestion or raise a concern, we can either be very dismissive and abrupt and tell them to, no, don't worry about it, and dismiss what they're saying. Or we can be engaging and more encouraging and more welcoming and provide a more effective collaboration or opportunity for collaboration as a team. And so at the end of the day, we as ourselves, as leaders, we have the choice. We choose which way you want to respond, right? And so understanding that there is an importance how we see things, having the awareness of things, and then also understand that our strengths, we all have strengths. We all have the same strengths, but we use it for different motives, different reasons. Our strengths can be overdone. And when our strengths are overdone strengths is essentially our behaviors that are intended to be good, are intended as strengths, but are perceived or maybe be coming across as very negative behaviors. And so that triggers others or yourself into conflict, right? And so let's look at another analogy here, okay? And I'm not sure if you can see my screen properly. Maybe minimize that. So this is the sound system. So how we respond to others may trigger them into conflict. So think of a sound system. You say you're at a party, right? And everybody's having a good time. The music is awesome. And someone comes along and just cranks that dial up, right? And when they crank that dial up, the music all of a sudden becomes distorted. The sound, it's not pleasant anymore, right? And so it's true with our strengths. When we overuse our strengths, when we crank that dial on that strength too much, for some people, it's okay. But other people with different motivational value systems, it sounds too loud. It sounds unbearable. I can't handle. So they get triggered into conflict. So when you see people actually responding in a way that they're disengaging from the conversation or they're just wanted to leave the conversation, it's because you probably have triggered them into conflict, right? And vice versa. You might have been triggered yourself, right? And understanding that there is triggers, there's conflict triggers, and how do we deal with that is the key that we need to understand. The problem with overdone strengths, it's that it's perceived as a weakness, and it implies that there is a deficiency or a fault in someone else. But in relationships, weaknesses are rooted in strengths. And when well-intended strengths do not produce expected results, what we do, we dial up, we crank up that dial and we try harder, right? As an example would be, think back where you had a conversation with someone and they weren't really gathering or understanding what you're saying. I have seen it, and I probably have done it myself. I believe I've done that early on in my years as a leader, is where you raise your tone, right? And you speak slower. So you start speaking louder and slower and trying to drive the point across to that individual. The issue is that there was no issue with how you spoke and the volume or the speed in which you spoke. The issue is that what you said and how you said it. So it's not the volume or the speed in which you spoke, it's how you said it. And the language you're using may not be connecting with that individual. So understanding that, right? There is differences and people have different perspectives. And so understanding that as well is important. Strengths, when overdone, can be unappreciated and or ineffective. And then finally, motives change in conflict. And we talked about having two different conditions. The first condition that we talked about was how our motivational value system is based when things are going well. What drives us to act and drives us to respond in a certain way and use certain strengths more so than others. But when we are in conflict, it changes. We're no longer concerned about people, performance, or process. We're now in a situation where we are defending ourselves. So we try to either accommodate, we either assert, or we analyze, step back and analyze. So there is a conflict sequence, and I'll give you an example. So I'm motivated. I'm a red motivated motivation value system. So I'm result driven. I want to achieve results not only for myself, for my clients. I want to make sure that we achieve what we're looking to achieve. So I'm driven to achieve those results. But in conflict, my first stage, my conflict sequence is my first stage is to analyze. So I disengage from an argument when things get heated and I go into conflict. I disengage from the conversation because I'm now assessing, and I'm assessing to see, is it worth being assertive, or do I just accommodate and walk away and let it go, right? And so that's what it is. For others who may be on the receiving end of that, they may see me as totally disengaging and not caring about what's being said. But the reality is I've been triggered. And if I've been triggered into conflict, then that's my sequence. And so understanding our individual sequence, much like our motivational value system, we have a very unique conflict sequence that is aligned with you. And so understanding that, then we can understand how to manage conflict and understand why we're experiencing what we're experiencing and how to bring ourselves back to home, which is where we do our best work and when we perform best when we are when things are good. So there's 3 different conflict stages, and we're going to focus quickly on that. I don't want to run out of time here. Our focus changes in conflict. And the reason I want to talk about that more importantly is because it's important to realize that you've probably seen these stages and you not realize that what was happening at each stage. At stage 1, when we enter into conflict, at stage 1, we all have a level of concern for others, the problem, and ourselves, right? At stage 2, when we enter into conflict and the conflict is not resolved and it carries on and it continues existing, then we no longer care about others. We only care about the problem and ourselves. And then finally, at stage 3, it all falls apart and we only care about self-preservation, right? And so think of a situation where you might have been in a meeting and or in a group chatting with somebody, and someone responded in a way that it didn't make any sense, right? It was very abrupt, and everybody's like, what the heck is going on with this individual? Why are they responding this way? What's their problem, right? Well, the reality is this. Most likely, that individual has been experiencing conflict, some sort of conflict. Although things might have calmed down at one point, in that specific moment, they got triggered. They got triggered again. And what happens is, because the conflict was not resolved, they stayed in conflict mode. And so they bypassed stage 1, stage 2, and maybe and gone to stage 3 directly, automatically. Or that might be their stage 2 in conflict, right? So the point is this, that it is extremely important to be able to recognize when either yourself or others have gone into conflict, and more importantly, to deal with it in a very timely manner. Unresolved conflict leads to all this miscommunication, leads to all this stress, it leads to broken relationships, it leads to mistrust, it leads to not willing to collaborate with others, it leads to totally disengagement from work. So knowing, first of all, being aware that there's conflict has been triggered, but more importantly, knowing how to manage those situations is key. I'm running out of time, so I gotta go here, sorry. The objective here is to restore and strengthen professional and personal relationships by developing a higher level of emotional intelligence and relationship intelligence. And that encompasses all the 5 lists of the soft skills that we saw. They're also known as EQ and RQ, emotional intelligence and relationship intelligence. Raising the level of awareness about yourself before we can actually understand others, right? So understanding who we are and why we're motivated, why we're triggered, why we do things the way we do, and why we lean towards certain strengths more than others, it will help us to not only improve our communication, but also recognize in others and be able to address it more productively. Learning how to respond more productively by selecting better strengths, and reduce the cost of conflict by raising the level of our communication effectiveness. Now, very important that we distinguish the difference between opposition and conflict. I'm not saying to you, not at all, that opposition is not good. I'm not saying that disagreement is not good. I actually say, let's have that. Let's have opposition, let's have disagreements, let's have meaningful dialogue so that we can look at the same issue from different perspectives, right? And when we are surrounded with a team that have different motivation and value systems, that's great, because it gives you the opportunity to make sure that you're not being blinded. There's not a blind spot in your leadership, that you can actually look from all perspectives, and you're making sure that you're looking at how it impacts others, and you're looking at making sure that we're not moving too quick, and it is going to impact our procedures, our processes, and stuff like that. So having a well-rounded team is very important. And so having those meaningful dialogues is crucial. However, it becomes conflict when we take things personal. And unfortunately, there's I've come across a lot of managers that may not be confident in their leadership, or they may take things personal. So whenever someone says something in a meeting, they take it as they're challenging their authority, right? And so if we understand that it's not personal, it might be just a different perspective, and then we can remain open-minded and be willing to listen and consider other perspectives, then it will actually help us to achieve a more effective way of leading and become more effective leaders. But it becomes conflict when we feel threatened, our values are threatened. So opposition is healthy and it's productive, and conflict is usually very unproductive. People go into conflict only about the things that they're important to them. And conflict provides an opportunity to learn what matters to people and how to change, right? So if you go into conflict, don't just say, oh, we're in conflict, forget it, it's lost, right? No. Take a look at it and see, okay, how can we improve this situation? How can I change how I approach the situation by using different strengths? And how can I coach as a leader? How can I help that individual identify what's triggering them, and then be able to coach them in a way that actually leads them out of conflict? So one of the things I believe, and I saw this quote the other day and I thought it was fantastic for what we're doing, and that is that work hard not to offend others. And I believe that we all do that. I don't think, especially as Canadians, we try not to offend people, but I think it's more important to work harder not to be offended. If we understand ourselves better and we understand what triggers us and we understand that there is different motives and motivations and people look at things from different perspectives, then the odds are that we're not going to take things personal. And when we don't take things personal, then we can have a more meaningful dialogue. Key takeaways: determine true intent and motives of others by asking questions. Don't assume, don't allow our bias to filter and the missing pieces of the picture of what we see. Understand how unconscious bias or our filters, how we see things, but understand how it's showing up on your leadership and your communication with others. As leaders, we need to be aware of that. Achieving communication effectiveness requires the developing a greater level of awareness, understanding, acceptance, appreciation for different perspectives. We've been talking about that. And understanding how to better use the strengths is key, right? It's like that saying, keep doing the same thing and expect different results is insanity. It's the definition of insanity. Well, the same thing is true when it comes to relationships and communication. Keep using the same strengths over and over and over and dialing it up is also insanity. We need to identify which strengths work in certain situations and which strengths works with certain people versus others, and then use more of our different strengths to achieve communication and leadership effectiveness. Recognizing when you and others are experiencing conflict allows you to manage these situations more effectively and timely. I can't emphasize that, timely. Unfortunately, I've worked with a few leaders where they totally ignore conflict. They don't address it, and it just sends the wrong message to the rest of the team. And that feeds into that toxic working environment, that stress working environment. And they feel then at the end that they're just babysitting little kids, right? And how many people have heard that saying, right? And it doesn't have to be that way. As long as we understand why it's happening, then we can work on the what's in the house. Opposition is healthy, and avoid conflict. And remember, it's not personal. It should not be personal. Transform your leadership effectiveness, the ability to lead, motivate, and inspire others without changing who you are at your core. We're not asking for us to change who we are. That's who we are. That's how we're made. But change how we use different strengths and how we communicate, that we can change. And that's it. Hope you found this valuable, and certainly look forward to answering some of your questions.
We don't have too many right now, but I have a couple of follow-up questions that I think maybe are in the back of people's minds as they try and formulate. So you're talking a lot about strengths, and I'm just wondering, do you have any like online resources or surveys that you think are pretty good for a leader or a manager to tap into, just to have that unbiased look at your strengths? I'm just wondering if there's any that you prefer.
So we have, I worked through Core Strengths. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but Core Strengths is an assessment program. There is a cost to it, but and we look at not only identifying your personal motivational value system, but also identify which are your top 6 strengths. It looks at all 28 strengths, and which ones are at the bottom strengths, and which typically are the ones that trigger us into conflict. So there is an assessment that we can take, and that actually I use with my coaching program with leaders, so that we can understand exactly who we are and what triggers us, so that we can be more effective in our use of strengths and develop better strengths and communication.
Following on the strength piece, can you give an example of when a strength becomes a hindrance or a weakness?
Yeah. Typically, a strength is a hindrance and a weakness when we overuse it. Okay. So, for instance, if someone uses the strength of being analytical, okay, too analytical, where they have their main strength is to analyze situations, make sure that things are we are not missing things. We're making the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, right? But what happens is that if they overuse that strength, it may come across as being too rigid, right? So when we're talking to that individual, they may come across as being unbending and too rigid in their approach to the situation. So they're overusing a strength when they may be they may need to use a different strengths, such as being more open-minded, more supportive, more option-oriented type of thing. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I'm sure Chris will let me know. Do you have any, do you have some related book or article recommendations for our group?
So I have some stats here. There is also, I could probably find more about the relationship theory document. I believe I have a PDF that I could share that really dives into a little bit more in depth about the relationship theory, awareness theory, I should say. And so that gives us a little bit more insight as to what I'm talking about and the importance of building that. Essentially, it's focused on, no matter whether it's professional or personal, everything that we do depends on relationships, right? And so developing ability to communicate in relationships, to communicate in a way that doesn't trigger others, right, into conflict is very important. And I can tell you this, I've been working with some leaders and they've come back and said, Ricardo, it's actually helping my marriage. Right? Because if you think about it, marriages are the most personal, most emotional relationship that we have, right? And so it's very easy to get triggered into assumptions based on reactions and whatnot, right? So yes, definitely I can provide that information.
This is a really good question. How do you bring yourself back to home? Like, how can you go about doing that? Maybe two or three tips on how to bring yourself back to that home place.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, one of the things that with anything, if you remember, I mentioned that the first thing we need to do is we need to analyze our part in that conflict, right? So we need to realize why we experiencing conflict, why we got triggered. So understand why we get triggered, and which motives or which core value are we feeling threatened by, right? But also look at, how are we managing that? How will I respond to that to that, right? So if I enter in conflict with somebody, I might be right, right? So I believe I'm right. But how I responded, how I spoke, instead of de-escalating and addressing and creating and having a opposition discussion, opposing views and looking from different perspectives, right? Because I'm right based on what I see, right? So if I look at this cup, it's a clear cup, so it's not a good example. But if I look at my phone, right? I see my phone, I see the numbers running, right? But you don't see that, right? So I'm speaking from my truth, right? You're speaking from your truth. So it's different perspectives. So when we have different perspectives, if we understand that other people have different perspectives and we enter a dialogue with a level of respect and appreciation for the other person's perspective, then we stay in that opposition mode, right? Where we can have a meaningful discussion. When it becomes conflict is when we start taking things personal. And so if you're taking things personal, you're becoming offended by it, then you need to analyze, why am I allowing this to become offended by this, right? How can I maybe react differently, right? I can't change what they said and how they said it, but I can change how I'm taking it and responding to it. Does that answer your question?
I'm sure Catherine will follow up if she has a follow-up to that. Do you feel it's important to use triggers and related experiences as learning and growth opportunities?
Yes, 100%. I think that, and this is where the having the assessment, complete the assessment that I was referring to, the core assessment is very important, because we're all human and we are not going to get it right from the get-go, right? And one of the things that that I've never really appreciated in some of the training that I've done is that you go into this very expensive training, they provide all these what to do's and how to do's, and then they say goodbye and they expect you to implement it. One of the things that we do through our transformational program is that we actually want to learn from every situation. We encourage our clients to actually take, you messed up on the situation, you didn't respond. Okay, let's look at it. Let's see what the situation was. What did you do? How did you respond it, right? What was the reaction? And how can maybe we use different strengths and responding to that individual, right? And so going through that process of reflection is very important, because that is what helps us to shape who we are and becoming a better leader in the future.
We'll take the last couple questions here. So
okay.
I've got two more. How do you communicate with quick-tempered people? For example, an issue is brought to someone and they immediately get angry and they do that strike back.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that, are they talking about a leader, or are they talking about an employee?
I'm not sure. I think because we're focusing on leaders, like as that manager supervisor, how do you do that?
Okay, so as a supervisor, as a leader, okay, so the first thing is that we need to understand, or try to identify what their motivation and value system is, right? So providing this, so one of the things that we also do is we do corporate training and assessment for teams, right? So then we can actually know who we're dealing with, who we're talking to in our team. But if you don't know, if we don't have the funds to do that, that type of training, then by knowing yourself, the different motivation value system, you can actually pick up and then I'll have an idea of who they are from whether they're motivated by people, whether they're motivated by results, or they're motivated by process. Because of the way they speak, there's some key words that identify individuals based on, are they motivated by the concern for people, or are they motivated by results, or they just really need to make sure that we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's, right? And they say certain things. So understanding that, that's the first thing. Second thing is, they may be, if they're responding and very abruptly right now, then the odds are they are already experiencing conflict, right? So in their heart, they're already either stage 2 or stage 3. And anything that's going to say, they're going to come across, because they don't care about you anymore. They just care about the problem and self, right? So they're coming at you with a very abrupt attitude because they feel unheard. They feel that they're not valued. They feel like their issue hasn't been addressed. So what we need to do is we need to kind of hit a pause button here, right? And instead of feeding into it, we actually need to apply compassion here and really get to the heart of what's troubling them, right? I know it's a lot of time, it takes time, but I'm telling you that's an investment in your business right now, because that employee is creating a toxic environment for the rest of the staff, right? And now everybody's instead of spending time working productively in the tasks they need to do, they're talking about that individual, or they are being triggered by that individual's abruptness and harsh, right? So addressing the conflict is key. And I can help leaders in knowing how to do that.
And our final question, do we need to make an attempt to understand a colleague's triggers when in conflict, opposition, just in communication, or is that a really personal question of our colleagues?
Yeah, very good question. You can't really tell the conflict sequence of someone else, okay? But you can pick up on their motivation value, right? Their level of concern towards people, the level of concern towards others, and the level of concern towards process. I know it sounds like I'm repeating myself, but it's so important to understand that. And by doing so, we can shift how we speak, okay? I'll give you an example. And how much time we have for the example? Oh, we're running out of time.
Okay, we're fine.
Okay. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a team, and I went in to have a one-on-one coaching time with one of the employees. The employee came in and she just, I call it, part of my description, vomit all over my desk. Like she just blew all over, like frustration, anger, just, anger towards the manager. And one of the things that we did was, because we had already done the assessment, we could understand, I knew exactly which top strengths she typically go to, and I knew her motivation and value system. Her top strengths were supportive, I just drew a blank, supportive, quick to act, and social, okay? So what happened is her manager was actually someone that was an absent leader. He would come into the office for a very short period of time, and then the rest of the time he was out. So they were trying to deal with conflict. And in that effort, because of his absence, they tried to figure out things on their own, and they would get frustrated. And when she didn't have answers to her questions, her need to be helpful would mean that she would get up and try to find the answers for herself. Her strength of being too quick to act was that when she didn't find answers, she got frustrated because she wants to get things done. Instead of writing it down and waiting or sending a message or an email to the manager and the owner and say, listen, I'm looking for these answers, her quick to act meant that she got up and went and started walking around the office. Her strength, social strength, meant that when she got frustrated, everybody else knew about it. And so she went around and triggered everybody into conflict because either people didn't know about what was happening, or she just interrupted those individuals that have need for structure. They need that time to process things, right? And so, sorry, I forgot the question now. What was?
Do we need to make an attempt to understand a colleague's triggers, or is that a very personal request?
So what was happening is, thank you. So what was happening is that when she was also complaining about the other people's response to her, right? And she then realized that she was actually triggering the other individuals into conflict. So she was like, my manager's not around, but then I got these people that are, complaining about how so their response was a result of her actions. So once we were able to identify how she played a role into that, then she could actually understand how she was triggering the other individual's conflict triggers, if that answers your question. So it's one of those things you kind of really need to study, understand what the situation is. You have to ask the right questions. You kind of have to look through it and work with the individual to identify what it might be the triggers. And we understand what the motivation value system is for the other person, which was green. They were very processed. They wanted to make sure that work was being done, and any interruptions just triggered them, right?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ricardo. This has been a great session. I even know that I myself have now walked away with a few things, thinking about my strengths and the strengths of my team, and how they kind of are motivated. I'm sure Jeremy loves to hear that. So to let everyone know, this session was recorded in case you missed it at the beginning, so everyone will get a link. And as well, Ricardo's put together a little bit of a resource. One thing I did want to ask Ricardo that was asked is, will you be sharing the slide deck?
I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll also make sure the slide deck gets out to everyone. I think some just had some really great ideas. We're trying to figure out whether or not they should be furiously writing. So I'm sure they will greatly appreciate that. And so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ricardo. I am sure you've all walked away with a few pieces. And thank you for the great questions. This has been a great session. And I hope you all have a very lovely day.